Hey everybody, Adam Bowen from Delphix with you again. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I want to do a very quick video on how easy it is to leverage the Delphix dynamic data platform to replicate data from one cloud to another. And we're going to go ahead and do that here. I'm using Terraform to deploy all my environments. I'm going to do another series on the things I do with Terraform for internally for demos and stuff. But here you can see on this first particular screen, as I scroll up, you can see this is an Azure environment, as if you couldn't tell by the name, but I'm using Azure resources and Terraform to deploy to there. You don't have to pay attention to all the rest of this information, but you can see I had some Windows sources and such. I have another environment I'm calling AWS 1, and in this we're obviously deploying to AWS. I have a Delphix engine and some Windows and Linux information. You can see I've also updated my host files with that in this AWS 2 environment. So I have a total of 3 different Delphix dynamic data platform deployments going on. That's a lot to say in there, one little word. But if I take a look here at my Azure environment, you can see I have a few different sources, but in my AWS 1 environment, I have a lot of different sources. So I have unstructured data, I have Sybase data, I have Oracle 11 and 12 data, a lot of different things in here. And then in my AWS 2 environment here, you can see I have a few different things. I have some Microsoft SQL stuff. I'm also actually virtualizing the cube and other things inside of there. So let's go ahead and start setting up replication. This is super easy. So in my AWS 1 environment, I'll just go ahead and give it a profile name. I'll just call it Azure Delphix environment. I'll give it an IP address and the username credentials, right? That's the very basics. There's some other options I could choose, obviously automation, or it could be automatic replication, and do I want to encrypt or limit bandwidth? Then the only other thing I have to choose is what I want to replicate. I'll say everything. So you can see all these sources, their folders, everything like that. So my Sybase, my Oracle, everything's going together at once. So the profile is created, I click replicate now. There's about 3 gigs worth of information on that one, so that'll take a little bit. So let's go to our second AWS engine. So we'll go ahead, for the sake of inconsistency, I'll name this something different. But actually, I'm going to make this a selective data distribution profile. And what that means, as I fill out the rest of this information, is that this replication job will only send mass data. So think about this from going from on-premise to the cloud is obviously I only want to send data there, but maybe I do some sort of production layer in Amazon, but I want to do some sort of quality testing or development in Azure, or vice versa. Well, this case allows me to only send the replicated data over, and that's what I've just selected. You can see the icons are a little bit different. So that means only sensitive data is going to be sent. You can see here that when I chose that profile, I didn't see all those other sources there, I only saw the one thing that Delphix says is a masked source. So you see this is running in the background, AWS, it's already done. It was only maybe 10 or 11 megs worth of information to send. The AWS 1 is going to take a little while. Like I said, it's about, I think, somewhere between 2 and 3 gigs. And so while that's running, let's go back to the Azure engine because we don't want this to be lopsided. So even though we've took 2 AWS engines and we've replicated them to the same Azure engine, and we can see here in the received replicas, it's receiving 2 replications. The reason those kind of look the same, named the same, is because the hostings are the same. It's just my demo environment, so don't worry about that. But what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to replicate from my Azure environment back to both the AWS ones. So again, I took 2 AWS engines, replicated it to the same Azure engine, but now I'm going to take my Azure engine and I'm going to replicate my entire contents to 2 different AWS engines. So I just set up the replication profile for the first one, and then when I was done, because of the focus, it's just a UI thing, it asked me if I wanted to discard my changes, but I didn't actually discard anything. It's just a UI issue that will resolve very quickly. And so we'll go ahead and now set up the profile for the second AWS engine. And in that we'll go ahead and, again, basic information. They're very simple things. Where am I sending it to? Whose credentials should I use to log into? What do you want me to call this? Very basic information. What do you want me to send? Right? Super easy. And just like that, we're now replicating the other way. So now, inside of 5 minutes, I'm now successfully replicating data between 2 different clouds, and several different data types. And I'm not an Oracle or Sybase guy. I've picked up a considerable amount of database knowledge since I've been at Delphix. But if you can easily see here, I don't need to understand the underpinning technologies under it. With Delphix, I have a single pane of glass, and via the dynamic data platform, I can put data wherever I need it, and it happens in minutes with a few clicks. And I could have set this up to be automated, etc. Like I said, this will take about 15 minutes for it to complete. The first one was done. And so actually, I'm going to cut here in a second to when it's done, because you don't need to stand here and look at me for 15 minutes or stare at my screen for 15 minutes. You see here on the AWS 1 engine, we're complete now. It's about 3 gigs. Azure going to AWS replicated about 2 gigs to AWS 1. Again, of course, we're sending the exact same data, so replicated again, 2 gigs to AWS 2. We can look at the received replicas on our engine and see what we received, how long it took to get here. So there we see in our mass source, we can see all the replicated objects that came from the AWS 1 engine that was replicated to here. We have things that we can look at, like we'll come back to this though in a little more detail, but we have a capacity screen that shows us how much data we brought, how much is that actual data outside of size, so how much data are we packing in a super small space. Then we also have some dashboard stuff that we can look at. We'll take a look again at that in just a few moments. But actually I want to just try and do something powerful. So here we can see in my Azure engine, I don't have anything locally, but here I can change my namespace. And up top in my Azure engine, I remember that replication profile name. I now switch to that replication profile. And even though I've not failed anything over, since I have that data in my Azure engine, I can now create copies of that data in Azure. So here I chose my secure source. You can see the icon's different. It says it's a secure master masked VDB, and it's stopped. So here I'm just gonna go ahead and choose the provision to my Windows target, which is running in Azure. I'll change the name to make it a little bit easier to manage and follow along. We'll call it vEmployee DB secured. And I'll just leave all the things as defaults. We'll put it in the dev copies. We'll leave the VDB name the same. Again, we'll just choose all the default things. You see masking job says it's already masked, right? So we don't have to select a masking job. This is secure data. Delphix understands that. Then we click finish, and now I'm provisioning. So this data did exist in Amazon just a few minutes ago. And now it's in Azure, and I'm creating a copy of it. So just inside of a few minutes. And even though I did a cut screen, it totaled inside of 20 minutes, right? Data was over, and I'm creating a copy, and it'll be done in just a few minutes. Here's that capacity screen I was telling you about. We can look inside of here and see how much space things are actually taking up in the Delphix engine, and how much they would be if you had it on media. So if you were just storing it in Amazon, in EBS or S3 storage, things like that, how much space would actually be taking up. You can even see for the namespaces here, which basically that's the replicated data that came over, how much it's actually using and how much that'd be worth unvirtualized. So remember that super small one was only about 10 megs. It's only about 2 megs of data actually taking up on the engine. But the one thing you'll take note of on the other is it said there was 13 gigs worth of information inside of a 3 gig space, right? So we brought 13 gigs worth of information, raw information over. So our VDB is done, and if I come into my Microsoft SQL Server Studio, I can do a query on that. Right, there's my vEmployee secured. You can see inside of it I have 9 records. And just like everything else in the dynamic data platform, everything is fully read-write. So I'm going to execute this query that puts Scooby-Doo into my employee database. Love that dog. And if I run my query again, boom, number 10, Scooby-Doo is present in there. And with that, you still have all the same dynamic data controls over your data that you're used to, right? So you don't lose anything with Delphix. So with that, we added Scooby-Doo, so we can just do a simple rewind of the virtual database, and in a few seconds that'll be done. So let's leverage this time instead of watching paint dry. Actually, let's switch over back to the Windows target where we had provisioned that VDB. And if we refresh the SQL Server Studio, here we'll see the database is missing, and then just of course for consistency, we'll just run the query again, and we execute the query. It says, what are you talking about? Right? So there's nothing here by that name. So that's going to take probably about a minute to finish. I think in the end, it's already generating the recovery scripts, so it'll be done in just a minute. And the one thing about all this, right, is that this is in the hands of your developers or your testers, your data operators, the ones who actually need the data, your analysts. If we come back and look at default profiles on my AWS engine, here we can see here's the data that came over from Azure. So all my virtual databases, copies of those came over. I could create copies of those in AWS if I wanted to in that particular place. Default is my home namespace, so that's what's actually was created and hosted there in the engine. We can of course see that also on AWS 2 if we change the profile. We can look at AWS's capacity. We can see there, namespace 1. That's the data that came over from Azure. There's 2 gigs of data that came over from Azure, but if we were actually house that in physical medium, we could actually see that would actually be 6 gigs worth of data. And we can even get a breakdown by which groups is making that possible. One thing I'll point out here, if you saw on one of the capacity screens, right, is if we look at it here in this engine, the total storage savings, if you count database copies and all the version control backups that we have of all the data there, we're actually looking at 150 gigs worth of data inside of an 8 gig footprint and all the controls. Our job is done, so we execute our query again, bam, we're right back to 9 records again. And that's really how easy it is. Obviously, I took more time to kind of explain some things for you, though I not only skimmed the surface. But the Delphix Dynamic Data Platform puts the control and the power right in your hands. So as data operators, and whether that's our database administrator friends or our storage admins, InfoSec, etc., you guys are empowered to be able to put the tools and the automation in there to make sure that the data is secure, that it's consistent, that it's reliable, and that it's available. All these things that ruin your weekends, right? And then for data consumers, so the analysts, developers, the testers, and the people who actually need the data, Delphix makes it so easy that the data is just there when they need it. They can easily, with a click of a button, provision the data they're allowed, say only from the masked copies. They can refresh with a click of a button. They can rewind with a click of a button. They can save and share with a click of a button. So that means they can get the data they need when they need it. And all this eliminates data friction on such a massive scale that it helps everybody's job, and it makes us all operate more efficiently. And when those things happen, our businesses excel and our lives are happier, and helps make the places we work great places to be. Anyway, this was a very short video. I just ran through some things, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is. I'll promise to come back with some more stuff on my Terraform Skunkworks projects, because I know several of you have been asking about that. Till then.